get started. I am Rex Hoover, and I am filling in for Ellen, who was here this morning to set up all of her food, and then has rushed off. Her son has a luncheon today, and so Ellen has gone to that. And I was going to be moderator anyway, because Jeff and I have a long history together, and so we're very excited to have him. Another blockbuster presentation by Jeff Abbott. But it's a very busy week for us. The 50th anniversary of Hill Country, the soiree as it's called, which is the celebration and tours of the high school or the middle school. And Ellen and a bunch of us have worked getting a lot of the memorabilia, a lot of the history of Hill Country together. And that is Wednesday night, this Wednesday, the 13th, from 5:30 to 7:30, of course, at Hill Country. So we hope if you had kids or any association with Hill Country that would come by. We've got a lot of great things planned. We also were working very closely with Shauna Kelso, who is the former Westlake Highline officer who runs the Westlake Alumni Association now for the EEF and is involved in everything, including this group here. Many of y'all may have met Shauna and know that she is just the sweetest gal and has 4 kids, all live in Lost Creek. And unfortunately, last Monday, her 8th grade daughter, who was about to graduate from Westridge, Greta, and she's a big dancer. She was going to start Westlake this fall and try to be a Highline dancer just like her mom. And she, I don't know if y'all have heard or not, but she passed away last Monday night at Elisa's dance studio. And just a unimaginable tragedy. And so we extend the condolences to Shauna and her family. And we did send a big platter of Tiff's cookies, or we're sending them tomorrow because her services are Wednesday morning before the Hill Country. So it's a big week, good and bad. Wednesday's going to be a very tough day for a lot of us. But so keep Shauna and her family in your prayers. So a lot of things were going on out here at 75, 76. We've had the Wild Basin 50th anniversary, the County Line 50th anniversary. And there's Paul Vickery back there. If you've got any questions for the Westlake kid who now runs Wild Basin. So we've had Wild Basin, County Line, and now we've had Hill Country. So a lot of things were coming out right there in 1975, 76 out here. Busy times. So next month, on June 8th, we have booked Bruce McCandless II, the third, I'm sorry, because his dad is the second who was an astronaut, and going to tell us all about that. So that's going to be a great presentation on June 8th. But today we've got Westlake's own author, Jeff Abbott. Jeff is the New York Times best-selling, award-winning author of 23, soon to be 24 novels. He is the winner of the International Thriller Writers Award for The Last Minute and a 3-time nominee for the Mystery Writers of America's Edgar Award. His novels have been summer reading picks on The Today Show, Good Morning America, USA Today, and the Oprah Magazine. His next novel, January and July, will be out July 7th. He and his family have lived in Westlake for the past 22 years. I'm going to vacation here in about a month down to Key West, and I've always wanted to go down there. And one of the reasons is because Jimmy Buffett has done such a great job of chronicling that time and place in his songs and also his books. And I've always thought, wow, it's so good that he was there and was able to record that and for everything. And we are so lucky in Westlake to have Jeff do the same. He has done a great job in his books, some of his books, of chronicling Westlake and Austin, and we're very fortunate that he has been able to record that. He understands it so well, and it's not a literal representation, but he really gets the vibe of what makes this place special and unique. Yeah. So we're very glad that we have that recorded. His wife, Leslie Fox, was her maiden name, graduated from Westlake, and her family has been out here all the way back to the Emmett Shelton days. In fact, Jeffrey Dochin was up here talking with Jeff about some of those relationships. Leslie is now an award-winning art teacher for our district. So Jeff understands the long generational lines out here. It's one thing that make Westlake. And so he lives it and understands how important it is in this district. Jeff and Leslie have two boys who went all the way through from kindergarten to graduation, basically the same age as my boys. So we've been doing stuff together forever. These were very, very smart and athletic boys, very active, involved in all kinds of academics, athletics, and choir. So Jeff writes very convincingly about the lure of the quality schools that brought us all out here and keep us in this community. And he writes about how involved all the kids are, and then that sucks the parents in, and which is obviously one of the big things about Westlake. In fact, in one of his books, based in Westlake or Lake Haven, as he has cleverly changed it to, a suspect is tracked down because of his bumper sticker that says, Lake Haven band, Sean Trumpet. So I think we've all seen that bumper sticker. So if you're going to do nefarious crimes, you might peel that bit of information off the back of your truck. And Jeff and Leslie were as active as any of the parents in all of their kids' activities, especially in choir and musical when they got into the high school. So if there's one thing that Jeff writes very convincingly about, and that is handing out programs at the front of the musical or working backstage in the back, because he and Leslie were there for every single event doing all of that. In fact, I've got to give a shout out to them because their oldest boy, I believe, was 1 or 2 years older than my oldest boy, who was doing the tech lighting and in the PAC. And I saw Jeff and Leslie at one of the musicals, and they told me that they came to all 4 nights or 5 performances, whatever it was. And it just struck me. I thought, well, yeah, it's just like any other event that our kids are doing. I'm not going to come one night. I'm going to come every single night. And it really made a big impact on Kathy and I. And so we started coming to every single night of the musical. We would go to the practices, and it really made a big impact on our relationship with our oldest son. So thank you for that. It's a great lesson. It's very, very hard to be a great parent, but at least you can show up, and that's a big part of it. Of all of Jeff's books based in Westlake or Lake Haven, my favorite is Never Ask Me, because I believe it is so set in Barton Creek West. It's a subdivision just to the west of here, where the Abbotts do live. And my favorite part about it is that no one ever goes out the front door and walks on the street. Everybody goes out the back door and gets into the greenbelt and goes up and down on the hike and bike, or the hiking trail, the greenbelt trails. And this is really very handy for these folks because they are using them to sell drugs, have affairs, beat each other up in the creek, or just kill each other. Because they're all drug dealers, CIA operatives, or Russian mafia moles. Now, we live right across BK's Road in Center Hills from, quote, Winding Creek. And I've always thought there were some sketchy characters over there, but I had no idea how bad that it really was. And so I know that our friend Kim Permenter, who lives in Barton Creek West, has come today because we're hoping to name some of these nefarious characters. And I was able to identify some of the characters, and my favorite is Chip Evans as the dashing young lawyer, Kip Evander. So I've been joking with his wife, Katie, all week about that. And then I don't know Shelley Robinette. She had said she was going to come, but they're a local couple that adopted Vincent. Shelley Robinette adopted a boy from Russia, and they were instrumental. I know Jeff's going to talk a little bit about that process that the book is that Never Asked Me is really about. It was kind of based on their experiences in adopting in Russia. My only regret as a history nerd, Jeff, was that there were no nefarious activities that took place at the tombstone of our Cedar Chopper World War I hero, Buck Simpson, in the Roberts Teague Cemetery in the neighborhood. Because you used everything else. I kept reading it going, I know they're going to go to the cemetery. I know nothing's going to pull it in. So I am very proud to introduce my friend, the very talented Jeff Abbott.
These are the nicest words Rex has ever said about me. After all these years, that's what it took to get to. That was an incredibly kind introduction, Rex. Thank you. I was just going to talk to y'all a little bit about kind of my writing background and then how we ended up in Westlake, because it wasn't a guaranteed thing. And then how do I fictionalize Westlake when I write about Lake Haven? I did not want to write specifically and literally about Westlake, but people tend to think that it's just like changing a street name, and that's not it at all. It's kind of drawing on what makes Westlake a unique and interesting place, and both the joys and challenges that people face in living in a place like this. And then I'll talk a little bit, if we have time, about my writing process, because Rex is always fascinated by how my insane process of writing books, like, I told him once that I tore up a book that I had admired, a paperback. I bought the paperback and I tore it up, and I tore the chapters up and I laid them all out on the floor. And I think Rex thought that this was a sure sign that I was a serial killer, that I was tearing up books, because I love books. And I would, and my first book was involved about killing off a book burner. He's always like, what has he done now to try to get a book written?
And I actually thought that it would help me understand some of these more difficult books if I tore them up and put them in actual linear fashion.
Yeah, it won't help you with Tolstoy. The tearing takes like 3 years for that. But I have been published since 1994. I was a child success. I was just a toddler. And I started off in that. I want to say a thank you to the library for hosting us today, because my first book was Do Unto Others, was the name of it. And it featured a male librarian in a small town between Austin and Houston, who is accused of killing a book burner, someone who is actually going to burn down the library. There were actually some book burning and book banning really going on in the early 90s that I was deeply offended by. And so I thought, well, I'll kill off a book burner, and the book sold. And my first event was at a Texas Library Association meeting in Baytown. And they gave me a kind introduction like how Rex did. And they said, and he killed off a book burner. And the librarians cheered. And that was how I realized how bloodthirsty librarians are. That was also my first brush with Hollywood, because Danny DeVito's production company optioned the books. And they wanted Kiefer Sutherland to play the librarian. And this was before 24. But I like to imagine that it would have been kind of like 24 if he had been in it. It would have been like, Chloe, the bookmobile has been hijacked by terrorists. No one can return a book. I need you to track it. And writing about a male librarian, which there are male librarians, but I guess there weren't so many male librarians in small Texas towns. So he would get fan mail, MASH notes. My favorite was the one from a small town librarian who said, I'm going to show my age because you don't have this as part of a library system anymore, that he could stamp my due date slip anytime. I was like, ma'am. So I wrote those 4 books, and then my dad got terminally ill, and I was his caretaker. And I was working a full-time job and writing books and taking care of him, and something had to give. So I stopped writing books for about 5 years. And then when I came back writing books, and I didn't think I would get a second chance. You don't get a lot of second chances in publishing if you just kind of stop writing. I wrote a mystery novel centered on a justice of the peace and a police detective on the Texas Coastal Bend. And those books got my Edgar nominations. They did very well. And so I sort of came back after my dad died. I then started to try to write again. And then started writing definitely not kind of small town mystery, but more kind of like bigger thrillers. And I wrote a book called Panic that did nothing here, but was on the bestseller list in the UK for 6 months, in Ireland for 9 months. was optioned by Harvey Weinstein, which is a whole separate presentation. I had to have 2 margaritas before I do that one. I eventually had to sue him after he had fallen from prominence because he had hired me to adapt it for television and had paid me half of what I was owed. And again, a whole nother presentation. But then because Panic had done so well, my British editors asked me would I create a series? And I thought of like, well, what if, I was trying to like, what would the series be? And I thought, well, I'll write about a spy or a former CIA agent who maybe uses his skills and powers for good. And I came up with the idea that he could be like a modern day Rick Blaine from Casablanca, except Rick Blaine owned 1 bar and I would have Sam Capra own 30 bars. And each book would be set in a different city where he owned a bar and he met someone who had gotten into trouble. So I wrote Adrenaline, which was the name of his bar that he came to own in London. And so each book was named for a bar up until like the 3rd book, because my editors felt this was too difficult. So we just started naming the books however we wanted. But my wife and I would go to London or Amsterdam or San Francisco or New York, and I would do the very important bar research to find a bar that I could create my own bar at. But also Sam was a young father in the books. My favorite description of him was Jason Bourne wearing a baby Bjorn, which I literally thought I should write a scene with that where he has to fight with the toddler strapped to him. But that never made that. But the point of why this matters is because I was writing books consciously not set where I lived. We were always going someplace else. Sam Capra never went to Austin until he did in a later book. But my American publisher was very, like the Sam Capra books a lot, was pushing him, but they were like, we still want you to write standalones. So could you write a standalone novel? And I had an idea for what if there was like a young woman who was in a car crash and she didn't remember anything, and that idea, and she didn't remember anything about the crash. So was the crash an accident? Was it an attempted murder? She was in a crash with someone she knew well, but they were in a place they shouldn't have been. I had this vague idea. And Rex talked about being involved with all the things in our kids' school, and it was just like Leslie and I could not go do the bar research anymore. It was like starting to get difficult to like, okay, we need to be gone for a week. And it got really, really challenging. So I was like, well, I'll write about books set here, because no one else was sort of doing it. I thought, but then I said, well, I have to change the name of the place to Lake Haven. I didn't want to write about Westlake and get sued. I mean, Chip Evans is a lawyer who has helped me with a bunch of stuff. And he was like, oh, please put me in the book. And I'm like, yeah, that might be him pinging in on the Zoom call. And I said, I'm not dumb enough to name the character after you. So I'm going to name him Kip Evander. And so Kip Evander has appeared in multiple books, and he's always pressing me to write an actual Kip Evander novel where he's the hero. But I thought, what will I talk about if I'm going to write about some place that is like Westlake? Which leads me how we got to Westlake. I grew up in Crestview and Northwest Hills in Austin. I'm old enough to remember when there was no Mopac and Mopac was built. But then I went off to high school in Dallas, and I went off to college in Houston, and then I eventually came back to Austin, and I ended up meeting and marrying a Westlake girl who we lived in Rosedale. She wanted to move to Westlake. Her family was very close to Emmett Shelton, who was the founder of Westlake. I'm sure as this group specifically, if any group knows. So Emmett got my in-laws, Malcolm and Rebecca Fox, to buy multiple lots of land. And they would pay him regularly, and they would go in. I guess they couldn't mail the check. I don't know. They brought the check to him, and they got very close to Emmett. And They then moved to Westlake and lived on the high road, which I feel should be the basis of a sitcom set in the seventies. Every time I'm like, well, did y'all have cable? No, it stopped at the bottom of the high road. You know, there was an ice storm. We were stranded on the high road for 4 days. And I'm like, why did y'all choose, y'all made it sound like a leper colony. Why have y'all chosen the high road?
And it's at the corner of Peace Pipe Drive.
Yeah. So, but Jeffrey had mentioned that my father-in-law helped set up subdivisions with these lots that they bought, and he helped set up the Fast Fox subdivision because he wanted a street named after him, and their last name is Fox. And do you want to say something about that? You mentioned that before. Emmett didn't want to name streets after himself, or
Yes, they never named streets after themselves, but Malcolm and Becky had bought this land. Malcolm and Becky had bought this land off of Turtle Canyon, and they were going to do a subdivision, and they wanted to name their road Fast Fox. Well, that didn't sound like somebody's name so much, and so, we were all happy about that. And so Malcolm and Becky named their road Fast Fox, and we named the road that we put in Slow Turtle.
I told Emmett that, or I told Jeffrey that I develop residential subdivisions, and I don't ever use like my kids' names or any kind of actual names, because as soon as you name it Kyle Drive, unfortunately, that name becomes associated with the next nefarious act that occurs. So
yeah.
it's a little bit safer to just go with something benign.
Well, and they also helped him with his book writing because Malcolm and Rebecca own American Press, which is a specialty supplemental book publishing company. Malcolm had been a sales rep for multiple of the large textbook companies and sold a lot of books to UT, where he's also very involved with the alumni band. So yeah, Becky told me Emmett was excited when he got a computer because he could blow things up to 36 point on the screen because his eyesight was giving him a little bit of trouble. But and one of the things that Leslie mentioned to me is that at Christmas, he would get like a decorative tree branch, and he would mount it on like a piece of wood so the branch could hang, and he would cover it with gumdrops hanging on the branches from ribbons. And that would be something that he would bring to Leslie and her sister Vicky. And when they would eat all the gumdrops, they would not allow their father or mother to add more gumdrops. Only Emmett could add more gumdrops. So Emmett would apparently stop by and bring more gumdrops to add for them for their Christmas. But he wrote a couple of books that they helped him with. And I remember seeing on one book we lost in a fire, but it was a copy of his novel, and he inscribed it to Leslie, and he said, "I loved you like a granddaughter." So, he was at our wedding, and the two families were close until they passed. I initially did not want to move to Westlake. I don't know that I have ever confessed this, especially to Rex. I hope there's a doctor in the house, but we were living in Rosedale, and I was perfectly happy in Rosedale. And, I just thought, well, we'll send the kids to Episcopal school, or that had been kind of our plan. And she's like, no, I really want to move back and have the boys go to school in Westlake. And I was like, I just don't like that they spent so much on the football stadium, which now is an incredibly modest amount compared to some. But I went to a game at the football stadium. I was like, well, these seats are awfully comfortable, and the team is really good. And so we started, Rex saw us at football way before our kids were in high school. We would go. In fact, to this day, I am not allowed to speak when Highline takes the field. Leslie was in Highline. So we don't go to the concession stand during halftime. We watch Highline, and I don't say anything except clap and cheer at the end. And I think there must have been people thought we were Highline parents. No, we had two boys, so we were not Highline parents. But I always felt that us moving to Westlake was the best decision that we made for our family. It was really, really great. Now I talk about how all the terrible things that happened in Westlake and how I fictionalized them. When the first book that was set in Lake Haven came out, Blame, which you have the two neighboring houses because it's about two families that live next to each other. I was at an event at Bee Cave, and two readers got into a very polite argument that Lake Haven was Westlake. No, Lake Haven was Lakeway. I mean, because Lake Haven was closer in its name than Westlake was. And they got into this very genial, polite argument about it. And I'm like, have y'all noticed the murder rate in Lake Haven? Why are you claiming this? You should be like, go, no, it's not us. You know, I'm not, this book could adversely affect your property values. But it's more than like renaming a street, because like people would say to me, I would get emails like, is Old Travis Road Bee Caves Road? Maybe, you know, I don't like to say yes, but I'll say maybe. Sounds like it could be. You know, I think you noticed something, but it was about the things that make Westlake representative of the American dream and the experience of being here. And I don't know if y'all have read Harlan Coben or seen any of his shows on Netflix or Amazon Prime. He's a very prominent mystery suspense writer. We've been very close friends for years and years. We text nearly every day. But he said to me something once that has always stuck in my mind about writing about suburbs or smaller towns, is that he said, hope is the most dangerous thing that there is, because you get people who get into a very comfortable life that they've worked hard for, or their family has helped them establish, and they think they have what is the good life, and then something goes wrong in that life, and they have to fight for it. And they have to face the risk of losing it. But what you have to give them is hope, because if it's just too much stuff that they can't overcome, then, you know, but you have to have that hope to struggle forward. So I feel those are what the Lake Haven books are about, people who might lose that life that we kind of all treasure here, a place they thought that was secure. And the book is about their journey to try to restore what has been lost. Or to get back to that place of happiness that they're in. So I promise this is not gonna be book report from hell, but I'm just gonna kind of step through the book and give you an idea of like what did I fictionalize in each one. So Blame is a story about a young woman who has lost the memory of her high school years. And people are like, how do I forget high school? You know, could you tell me? But her name is Jane Norton, and she is in a car crash in a kind of a very cliff, high hills, high road, no, locale with the boy who lives next door to her. They've always been close, but he is killed, and she has her memory wiped. And a lot of people blame her for what happened to them, because they don't know what happened. And that there were apparently things that she said before that made her look bad or was suspicious, or, you know, something was found in the, I don't want to give away spoilers, something was found in the wreckage that kind of incriminated her. So when the book opens, she is homeless. And this is someone who went to Lake Haven High School and had been accepted for college, and but her life has completely fallen apart. She is at a fictionalized St. Edward's University, living off someone else's meal plan, but not enrolled. She is like a homeless person kind of camped out near there, and she gets a message on an old email account. Someone says, I know what really happened that night. So she determined she has to find this person. She is homeless. She doesn't have a car. I had to figure out how walkable is Lake Haven compared to Westlake, because she's just walking around kind of like an amnesiac detective. And she starts to realize that what she is trying to solve is her own attempted murder as she is going through this. So the stuff that got fictionalized in this, a lot of it was just like the street names, like Old Travis Road or to Bee Caves Road. Y'all don't know how long I debated this. The high school team are the Lake Haven Roadrunners. I just struggled. What am I gonna call them? And then I was like, that was like the biggest wink I gave anyone. But she has to deal with a lot of her high school friends in dealing with this. And some of them have gone on to UT, They've gone on to other schools or at sort of this cusp of starting successful professional lives. But what happened to her is a blot and a dark spot for all of them that they, people, you find out, Rex has talked about, I referred to our house fire. You find out who your friends are. Yeah, when you're in an amnesiac car crash, you also find out who your friends are. And, people because I thought, well, she's going to be kind of what we call an unreliable narrator. You don't know what truth is she telling or she remembers. The people around her are all unreliable narrators because people are covering up what actually happened. So I actually think this is the most cinematic of my books, and no one has optioned it. All the Sam Capras, all the other books have been optioned at different times at different film producers, and no one has bet on Blame. And I'm like, this is the one. What is wrong with y'all for that? So that's Jane's problem. Then I had The Three Beths. This was the book I was writing when the house burned down, and I had to finish it still, and I was only 2 days late with it after the house burned down. But it is about a young woman and her father, and who live in Lake Haven, and she is at the food court at Lake Haven's one and only mall, which is probably Winding Creek Square. And she thinks she sees her mother. This is 2 years after she's vanished. She thinks she sees her mother in the food court, and she chases this woman. She follows this woman through the food court and through Nordstrom's, and the woman suddenly vanishes. And did she see her, or is she just losing? The young woman's name is Mariah Dunning. She losing her grip on reality. Her father gets his car vandalized, gets notes that people believe he killed his wife, and she vanished at a lot that they owned, Jeffrey, out for, we're not in such a built up part of Lake Haven yet, but where they were going to build a house and they'd had the lot for a long time, and her husband hasn't built the house, and people are like, that's because he buried her on the lot. And he's like, I don't have a wife. I don't want that. Why do I want to build this big house on a lot and live in it on my own? But one of Mariah's friends is a crime podcaster who discovers and tells to her, Mariah's mom was named Beth. There are 2 other Beths who vanished from Lake Haven in recent memory. And so is this the work of a random person, someone who doesn't like women named Beth? Or is it a coincidence? Or is there something else connecting these 3 women? So the parts of this that I fictionalized were definitely about, the lots, not being, being the lot. Every time I felt really safe every time we go out to one of my in-laws' lots. There's a Lake Haven bridge on the edge of town, which is really kind of more like the 290 overpass, down by Mopac. But I needed a bridge because I needed something to be thrown off a bridge. And I couldn't use the Emmett Shelton Bridge because that's over water. So I had to invent a Lake Haven bridge, and I'm sure people were like, why? It's not that hilly. Well, there's a cliff there now, so I just do what I need. But it also had to deal a lot with the perception of what success means for our kids. Because Mariah when her mother vanished, she was at UT. So she was, doing all the things that were kind of expected, but their lives have gotten derailed. And how do you get back on that? But it's also about, what do you think about your neighbors? Do you think someone in your neighborhood is capable of having cold-bloodedly killed his wife and covered it up? How do people react to you? Do they believe you? Because I think in all our neighbors, people would be supported. They would be like, no, I don't believe that this person did this. And then there'd be other people that say, sure, she did it. Sure, he did it. Yeah, of course, I'm just going to post anonymously on the Facebook group, right? Or the WeChat. But these books are feeling really dark right now. Then Never Ask Me. This is the one that we're tied into adoption, because we knew a lot of families who had adopted kids from China or from Russia. And our friends, the Robinettes, had adopted their son Drake from Russia. And I just, when I ask people for help, I don't expect that they're going to like tell me everything. I thought, gosh, it'd be so nice if they spent 30 minutes with me just to answer my questions. They gave me Drake's adoption file. It was like a Mishner novel. It was so thick. And they told me all this stuff that you just don't know unless you talk to someone who has been through the process, like how they had to pay bribes at every single stage. And if you know Vince Robinette, I was like, I'm sure he did not want to do that. He's an accountant. He's tracking all the expenses. And Shelley had told me a story about she was attacked by a guard dog at the orphanage when they were there to see Drake one of the times, because you get like 3 visits before 2 or 3 visits. I'm going to forget the details and get it wrong. But it was unbelievable, kind of what everything that they went through. And then in the story, this one really focuses much more on a specific neighborhood, like what Rex said he thinks is Barton Creek West. It's called Winding Creek in the story, but the body is found in Winding Creek. There are trails behind the houses that people are taking when they don't want to be seen in Winding Creek. Not that anyone in Barton Creek West has ever done that. I just like to put that in as a legal disclaimer. But it is about a family of 4, a father, a mother, an older daughter that was their biological daughter, and then their son that they have adopted from Russia. And the person who is found dead on a bench in the neighborhood's park is the adoption consultant who facilitated and advised them on getting their son from Russia. And so she's brought a lot of joy and happiness to multiple families in the Lake Haven area. And so why would anyone want her dead? And so the 4 of them get very suspicious of each other. It's like they start to see things where they think it could have been one of the family members who did it. And one of the other things, so when they did this as an audiobook, they hired 4 narrators. Y'all, that is expensive. I was like, what? Are y'all sure? And it's because there's a chapter that is headed by each of the 4. The chapters are named for the 4 characters, whose ever point of view it's from. They're not narrating, because I'm not doing 4 first-person narrations, but it's more like if you've read Game of Thrones, that it's just, that character is at the center of that chapter. But this was the most procedural of the books. And this is the one that the Westlake police helped me with. Because I'm sure it's a little awkward, like, how y'all investigate murders? Are y'all real dedicated on that? Or is it kind of, how does that work? And Robert Mills, who is the police chief, kindly answered all my insane questions. And if I got things wrong, I mean, I always say in the acknowledgements, if I get something wrong, it is my fault, not theirs, or I made a conscious choice to ignore a point of procedure for dramatic effect, but do not call them and tell them what they got wrong. But he's never called me to say, well, you got that wrong.
I was going to shout out to Robert Mills real quick, because Robert was in the class of 1982, right behind me. I was in 81. And Robert was part of our volunteer fire department back in the day, because that was all we had out here, and there were no dads at all during the day. So it was, as we've talked about, and everybody knows, it was all the high school kids that were in the fire department during the business day. And Robert was one of the many kids who did that, who went on to very productive careers as firemen, police, EMTs. It was really a great kind of jobs program back in the day. And Robert now is at City of Westlake Hills. And I just talked to him recently, and he was telling me that he had been listening to all the oral histories of Emmett Shelton. So thought I'd throw that out to Jeffrey.
Yeah, and I really had fun writing this book, because it was, the Lake Haven books tend to stay very centered in Lake Haven. I got to send characters to Russia, and that was a lot of fun. Yeah, one of the things that they talk about in this, I mean, there's specific call-outs, because there is a true crime writer who is also very interested in writing about this book, because the mother and the family, about this case, because the mother and the family was a songwriter for boy bands in the early 2000s. So when the kids are listening to Sirius XM on the 2000s channel, they call it mom radio because this is like basically like, you know, she wrote like 4 hits in sync or something like that. And then it was like, then she became a Lake Haven mom. But that was.
And Jeff, I was gonna ask you about that because there was a songwriter in Barton Creek West at that time.
Oh, was there?
Yes.
Okay, see.
So I didn't know.
Like a place you might find a songwriter. But yeah, no, I didn't do that on purpose. I'm gonna move a little faster because I still want to get to these other two, but so, an ambush of widows. An ambush is the actual collective noun for a group of widows. So once I found this out, that was like the perfect title for this book. Now, because they have the 2 widows are in windows, numerous times people have told me how much they enjoyed an ambush of windows. I pointed this out when they sent me the cover. It's like, do you think it's remotely possible that could confuse people? And they're like, oh, no one's going to be confused by that. I'm like, yes, they will be, because I have called it an ambush of windows in an email since y'all sent this to me. But this is about only one of the 2 women who are widowed when their husbands, who did not know each other, who had no known connection, are found murdered together. And one of the guys is a software executive from Lake Haven, a Chinese immigrant, and his wife. And this was delving into the people who have been super, super successful in Lake Haven and what happens when something in their lives goes wrong. So this was like a guy who was worth tens of millions of dollars. In fact, he wants to move from Lake Haven, which his wife does not want to do because she wants her kids to go to the schools, but he wants to move to like a downtown penthouse in Austin. And the other widow is from New Orleans, so which is another place where I have ties to. But this was looking at like the rich and like the Robin Leach could have narrated this book for the rich and famous in Lake Haven. This is also the book I get asked the most right now if I will write a sequel to it, because they would like the widows to keep investigating crimes. But and then finally, after I'd done these standalones, I was still writing the Sam Capper novels. I wanted to take Sam in a slightly different direction. So I debated this for a long time, whether or not I should do this, but I took the series, the first 5 books, Sam's son maybe gets up to about, I don't know, maybe 3, but I wanted him to be a character in the novels because Sam is a single father, and wanted them to have more interactions together. So I moved the series forward in time 10 years. So in the original book, Sam Capra is no longer with the CIA, but he's loosely tied to a group who gave him the bars around the world, and those are used as sort of safe houses and places for his operations, but you don't really quite know exactly who he's working for. You know, it's a force for good, but you don't quite know what it is. That all went away, and then he is now actually working for something called Department K, which is like the most secret intel branch of the US government, and doing jobs for them. And the vibe of the books when I put him in Lake Haven was kind of like The Americans or Dexter or Breaking Bad, where someone that you think that has an externally normal life, a chemistry teacher in Albuquerque, or a blood splatter forensic technician in Miami, or a pair of married travel agents in DC, has this entirely secret life. His son has no idea that he is an active agent for the American government, you know. And it's like people whose parents worked for the CIA, they're like, they always said they worked for the State Department, you know, or agriculture. That's always a big one. But his son doesn't know. And then, of course, Sam gets an incredibly dangerous assignment in Lake Haven, and has to leave Lake Haven, but his son gets caught up in it. But it opens with him at Lake Haven Middle School, at a basketball game that his son is playing in. And Sam sees someone walk in that he knows is a government assassin who has not come to hurt anyone, but to give Sam his latest assignment while Sam is there trying to watch his kid, win the game for the Lake Haven Middle School. And my wife made me change the colors of the school so that wasn't Westridge, or Westlake. But yeah, and so, but that was sort of a different thing of Lake Haven for him to be based there. Now, I did go to Miami. I'd already done one book set in Miami, and I still had tons of notes from Miami because that's where a lot of this book takes place. But Sam is hunting the last American trader who defected to Russia, an American agent who turned traitor and defected to Russia and has now fled Russia and come back to America. And the Russians are looking for him and the Americans are looking for him, and they want everyone to find him. They want to be the first one to find him. So they give this job to Sam, and then his son gets tangled up in this as well, which is really something to write about. A middle schooler pulled into a dangerous situation and be like just super careful. Anyway, so that's how Sam is now in Lake Haven too. Yay. Hopefully he's not your neighbor. And then I'll just mention this one. This is my next novel that will be out July 7th, January and July. All the time I'm saying it's out January 7th. Anyway. This is kind of bringing the world of the Sam Capra books and the world of my very first books with the librarian in a small town together. So it is like an espionage novel meets a small town mystery. It is about two young people who both come to this small town looking for the same man. January is a disgraced intel agent who's trying to find someone who's leaking information, selling information on the black market from her agency. And there's someone in that small town who could be connected to that happening, someone that was in a witness relocation program, and this is where they stashed him, and he might know something. And July is a ex-Rice football player whose life has kind of fallen apart, and he's trying to get it back on. So he has started a bodyguard service, and he has lost his one client. His one client has vanished, so he's got to get him back because he needs a reference. And the two of them come together and don't really get along, despite both having month names. But this will be out in July, and it's my first book out in like 3 years. So I'm really excited about it. Are we okay on time?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay. I was gonna talk just really quickly about how I write because I know Rex likes that. I start off with a lot of people say, well, I think of a character first. And some people, I think of a situation first. I am not religious about this. I will take whatever I get, whatever idea drops in my head. Sometimes I will think of a character first. Like with Sam Capra, I thought of the character, and then I thought about what kind of adventures could he have. With Blame, I thought of the situation first. It wasn't necessarily I thought of Jane Norton. I thought, what if you were an amnesiac about a car crash you were in, and that was at the heart of a mystery. So I will come up with sort of that basic concept or idea, and then I just start generating ideas and character thought, like ideas for characters or ideas for scenes on index cards. And so that way I can generate lots of bad ideas mixed in with the good ones, and I can have a little stack, and then I'll kind of go through it, and that will sort of suggest a plot line to me. So I'm very old school about doing this. I'm, index cards, well, who knew? And then I will do just enough research to get started. If I tried to research everything I think I might know, I would never get a book done because I would be just like, let me dig up one more thing. And because I often don't know what I need to research until I get further along in the book. So some of the things like for research, Rex mentioned this. I couldn't go to Prague or someplace I was doing for one of the books. So I found Google Street View and the actual street that was by the railroad station in Prague, because I knew a specific place I was going to go to. And I was like, okay, this is how the cars park. They have to back in. There's a pizzeria. There's what looks like a bookstore, and just look at that. I mean, I wrote scenes in one of the Sam Capper books set in Afghanistan. Leslie goes, "You can't go." Canceled my flight. But I would find a lot of first person accounts of people who had been through there from, different sort of viewpoints. And I would just sort of steal or from that. For the first Sam Capper, the London bar Adrenaline, I didn't know anything about London bars, but I already had a number of books, and Panic had already done really well though. So I had a lot of readers on like Facebook, and I said, y'all tell me where a cool place to be would be for a bar. And so people left all these comments. My editor's assistant took a map of London and put push pins in. And they decided they were going to take me when I went over to promote the book after Panic that came out, which was called Fear, and was also a bestseller in Britain. They said, we're going to take you to these bars, Jeff. We think you need adult supervision. We're not going to let you wander freely around London. And we're going to take you to the bars, and that'll help you put your ideas together for the bars. We started off, it was like my editor and his assistant and 3 guys from sales and 2 other editors. Well, the second bar, the 3 guys from sales met up with 3 women, and we lost them. And then by the end of the evening, it was like me, my editor, and his assistant. And it was so much drink. I could not keep up with the British. And I said something because they insisted on paying for every bar tab, and it was like considerable. And I was finally said, I said, David, y'all have to let me pay for this part of this. And he goes, oh, Jeff, we published Twilight. We can afford it. I was like, well, thank you for that. Mostly with the research, Leslie got very worried about my search history because her sister works at Disney, and we would go to Disney World quite often to see her sister and her brother-in-law. And she was like, if we are not allowed to get on a plane because of your search history, homemade bomb, how to cover up a murder, let's like football, all these things that can get you in trouble. So fortunately, that never happened. So I take the index cards, the ideas, and I'll write more of a detailed outline that I generally share with my agent and my editor. They would like to know that I have some idea where I'm going before they, before we say, yes, this is it. So I write them a detailed outline. I write like a single page outline for the sales directors and the executives, so they have a kind of a precise of what they're getting. And then when I write the first drafts, I try to do 2,000 to 3,000 words a day, which is a lot, but I just want to get the draft done because you can't edit a blank page. So I some days I write more than that, other days I'm not. Like when I'm getting to the end of a book, I have been known, I think my record was 8,000 words in one day, and my hands were just completely cramped up, by the end of that. But I'm following my outline, but I often get better ideas on the outline until I get as I'm writing. So when I have about 100 pages to go mentally, I will re-outline the book. So any new ideas or anything that I've introduced, I'm making sure that everything wraps up satisfyingly, hopefully, for myself, for the readers. I'm not leaving anything hanging. If you've read any of my books and I left something hanging, this is a great time to point that out. But I just try to tidy up everything and then get to the end. And then it goes to my editor, my agent, and my wife, who are the initial readers. And then usually there's 2 or 3 rewrites, sometimes major, sometimes not, after that. But that's sort of how the process goes. I think, do you want to take questions, or I know you will have the first question.
No, we'll do a little bit of Q&A. But first of all, let's thank Jeff for what was wonderful. And I want to thank everybody for coming out today, particularly in Ellen's absence. And one of the things that I forgot, kind of a procedural thing that we do at every meeting, is to ask if we have any new attendees today? Is there anybody new to the, okay, so I'm gonna ask you, sir, to tell us your name and number, or name and a little bit about how you came to us.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Cooper. We moved to Austin in 1970, and I went to Austin, the old Austin High. Lived in Pemberton Heights.
John, can you hold that a little bit closer?
And knew a lot of people in Terrytown and so on. That was my childhood experience. But in 1991, after we were married, we bought 20 acres in Dripping Springs. Right after we were married. And then in 95, we moved to Davenport Ranch. So I've been in Westlake for 31 years. My wife went to St. Stephen's in the 70s as a boarder. So I've got deep roots here, and I'm actually an author as well. And my wife worked at West Bank Community Library. So she gets the newsletter, and I thought, well, I gotta come. Anyway, I'm gonna start coming to these things. I'd love to meet you guys, and hope to get to know you.
Right, thank you, John. And we're always wondering if those true stories were true, the rumors we heard about St. Stephen's back in the day when the borders were out there.
Oh, yeah.
Ma'am?
Hi, I'm Shelley Singal, and my husband and I haven't lived here very long. We moved here in the fall of 2019, which was a little rough start. And so we didn't get very good roots when we first moved here. Ellen, I was talking to yesterday, and she said, "Oh, you should come to this meeting." And Jeff's books were great for me during the pandemic.
Oh, thank you.
So this was a great first meeting for me, and roots are important. I mean, I come from a family who, has a lot of roots in Colorado. And so I would like to learn more about this.
Right, thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Ellen Cooper. I moved out here in January of '96. So that was what, 5-6 years ago, something like that. I've been in Austin since '94. My daughter went through all the schools, and she graduated from Westlake in 2010. And then later she taught for almost 10 years voice lessons at Westridge and at Westlake some. And then I have a son who's now finishing his junior year at Westlake. So I had a little gap. So I didn't do a lot of reading over the years, but I actually, I'm a wannabe author of nonfiction, and I'm in the process of working on that. But also, ironically, in the 90s, I went through a time where I was reading, and I read a multitude of Jeff's books and really enjoyed them. And then when I saw this event, I had to be here, and I started reading a more recent one and read it in about 2 days. I'm like, wow. But anyway, appreciate being here.
Great, thank you. And Jeff, you kind of give me the first question. One, I had asked you if you knew the kind of number or magnitude of books that have been sold, and you mentioned Harvey Weinstein, which is a whole other story, but have you had any other kind of Hollywood type of interest?
Well, I don't always have count of how many books have been sold. The books have been bestsellers. First were bestsellers in the UK and Ireland, which was weird, but that does happen sometimes. And they did so well there, that led to them getting acquired, because if y'all don't know how foreign rights work, I have a different publisher in every country where I'm published, right? So, someone buys German translation rights, another publisher buys French translation rights, and so on. Like my British publisher covers like India, Australia, New Zealand, but not necessarily other countries. So weirdly, like the books were bestsellers in Germany, in Turkey, in Australia, and had some in France. But sometimes it would be like a different book would be a bestseller. Like, okay, like I wrote about, people having, and I can say this because I'm part French, but one of the books that did better in France than did some other places about three people who are trying to get on a drug, but they've all had to be under psychiatric care. And my film agent was like, well, the French, they love stuff like that. They love stories that are like that. And I was like, okay, well, there literally is no predicting. There, for a while, I had like Turkey. Turkey was where the books were doing really, really, I have no connection to Turkey. I don't know if they just got really well translated or anything like that, but there was like a Facebook group of like teenagers posing with their Jeff Abbott books in Turkey. And I'm like, wow, okay, fine, great, that's wonderful. But yeah, no, Hollywood, I mean, yeah, I've had any number of books optioned. I've had them optioned by foreign producers. I've had them optioned by American producers. I've had them optioned for film. I've had people want to option them and turn them into television series. They were going to start filming one, then the pandemic hit, and they lost their financing. One Collision is one book that the same producers have had optioned it for 15 years. And that means every year they are renewing the option. They have to pay me to do so.
Wow.
And so, yeah, but that was also with the Weinsteins. He had two different, with Panic, they optioned it before it came out. The guy who was the book scout for Harvey Weinstein is the acquiring editor on this book. We have known him for a long time. But yeah, that was before the book had even come out. They were reading advanced copies and optioning it. But yeah, he had two different screenplays written. I saw the first one. It had nothing to do with the book. It was just like, it has Panic, based on the novel by Jeff Abbott, and that was it. The rest of it was, they had just really gone far afield. And he paid someone a lot of money to do that. And then they had another one that I guess he also wasn't happy with. And then he hired me to adapt it for television because he was doing like Marco Polo and Peaky Blinders. He was like when streaming was really starting to take off. And so, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, other producers, have optioned things. Nothing has ever made it. I've not, Harlan's been very successful. I take a vicarious thrill in that because I also hear about how everything's going wrong or right, on those shows. But yeah, I have a film agent. She's a hard worker and an extremely patient person. I couldn't do it.
Okay, so that proves it. Westlake football sells around the world. Yes, John. And would you please state your name when you ask a question?
Yeah, hi, John Cooper. I'm really interested in, Jeff, in the writing process. In like, what's the shortest time you've produced a book and you just get into flow, and how long did you struggle with your longest one? And do you write in your pajamas, or do you have a special place to write? Do you go out to your man cave in the backyard? What's it like to get one of these off the ground?
Yeah, I do have an office at home. I had an office at home before the fire. And I try to treat that as a space. We had two elderly corgis, and they didn't like to go up the stairs anymore, so I wrote a lot more downstairs because they wanted to be with me. So things like that affect your writing process. I sort of described earlier how I outline and do all that. The fastest I've ever written, I'm not sure. Usually the books take about a year to do. I might have written, I finished writing one of the books right after the fire, and I didn't remember finishing writing it.
Wow.
And then I read it and I thought, no wonder I don't remember finishing this, because it's not what, I can't, this was a mess. I had to throw out the entire ending and rewrite it, and then it was okay. But yeah, it's just trying to be very steady in your production. But like, I had started two different books before I wrote this one. I got the idea for this one from a dream, which has never happened to me before. So it's hard to say that. I like to feel that maybe I'm underselling my own consistency in being able to do this, but it is sort of just that process of getting everything set up to tell the story, then trying to write the story as quickly as you can in the most disciplined way. You know, I'm self-employed, right? No one is really leaning over me saying, you need to get this written. I need to get this written. I mean, my wife could do that and I would understand, but I'm not sure if that's answering it. What clothes do I write in? It's just, I probably really comfy ones. I will admit that, yeah, there might be some sweatpants involved, because I don't have to dress up, but, you know.
And, for those of us who lived out here, way back in the, 70s, 80s, when houses burned down a lot more from lightning. And I had friends when I lived in California that, in wildfires, their houses would be 18 inches, 2-story houses. And it's an incredibly traumatic thing, to lose literally everything. And one of the things that I always was struck when the Abbott's house burned, was that a lot of people, particularly authors, worked to replace his personal library of books that he lost, which I always thought was a very touching thing.
Yeah, I lost over 2,500 books in the fire. And my sons don't really like for me to talk about the fire, write about the fire. I thought I'd write a book about the fire because I'm a writer, that's how I cope with things. And they were like, please don't do that. So I was like, I respect your request. So the only time there's a blog called Crime Reads that's very popular, one word, Crime Reads. If you Google Crime Reads Jeff Abbott, you'll find an essay that I wrote about what happens when your library goes up in smoke. Because it was more than just a number of books, it was sort of an annex of my imagination. I mean, if I got stuck writing a scene, I had a whole library of books where I could pull one off the shelf and maybe get some inspiration from. But yeah, that certainly affected some ways in which I did my writing, but that was also, we rebuilt and we moved past it. I will say one thing, for all the things I write about Westlake that can be potential life pressures and things like that. The way that Westlake rallied around us, I will never, ever, ever forget. I mean, there were people fighting to bring us dinner, there was a GoFundMe set up to help us with expenses right afterwards. I had a neighbor that I barely knew while the house was burning, press $500 in cash into my hand and just say, don't worry about it. I really didn't know this person. It was several houses down from us. And I was just kind of in shock, but I remember there were like people that called into the high school and said, we don't know the Abbotts, but how can we help? Because our oldest son had just graduated from high school. He was about to go to Rice. And our youngest son was about to start his sophomore year. So, people knew them through choir or things like that. And it was just the care and compassion that was shown to us was a really stellar moment in my mind for Westlake, and will always be remembered.
Well, that's one of the great things, one of the reasons why we all live out here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Laurie Mahaffey. I'm a retired librarian, and the first thing I did at the Austin Public Library was buy books. It's a fun job spending other people's money. Just wonderful. The question I have for you, I live in Lost Creek, and Bob Woody lives in Lost Creek, and Bob Woody owns a lot of bars on 6th Street. I'm wondering if, just like you tapped into the Westlake Police for research on that, did you ever talk to Bob Woody about bars when you're doing those books?
No, because I was pretty much talking to people in bars in the locales, and they weren't in Austin. So, but that's useful to know.
Yeah,
I'm sure Sam Capper must own a bar in Austin. I do have a friend who owned a bar on 6th Street and still owns a bar in Mueller. And he did tell me kind of a lot of nitty gritty things about the operation of them. And sometimes I would use part of that.
Okay, this is just a real quick comment. I worked for a woman who was the assistant director of the Austin Public Library, who was trying to finish her PhD while raising 3 children alone and working at the library. She said to herself, 200 pages a night, 200 pages a night. And she said, if she got to those 200 pages at 10 o'clock, she went to bed at 10 o'clock. She didn't get to those 200 pages by 1 a.m. She went to bed at 1 a.m. So there's a lesson. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm Gary Canepa. Sure enjoyed your presentation. Do you ever get plagued with creative block? I mean, you sit down and you just can't get it going. And if so, how do you overcome it?
Well, the joke used to be that if I had writer's block, I looked at the mortgage payment and suddenly it went away. But yeah, I mean, there are times that definitely like sometimes people think a creative block is not being able to come up with an idea for a book. Sometimes it's getting into a book and then not being able to figure out what happens next, or in a way that feels interesting or compelling to keep the reader going. And usually it's something you've done a little bit earlier, you've made a bad decision. And if you'll go back and look at everything again with sort of a clear eye, you might see like, oh, maybe I need to get this character earlier on stage, because it seems like she's causing a lot of ruckus. Let's, something like that. But yeah, I mean, the fact that I started 2 books and abandoned 2 books before I wrote this one, it still happens. I mean, every book is different. I don't think, no one should assume because I've written 24 novels that as I sit down, it's like, well, this will be a breeze, because every book is different and the page stays blank until I'm filling it. So.
Right here. Quick question. Hi, I'm Pat Judd. I was going to ask you to describe your process. Describe the process of turning in a manuscript, having editors go over it, maybe re-outline things. How painful is it for you to, I don't know, turn in a 300-page manuscript and somebody hands you back 200 pages? And says,
Well, yeah, it doesn't happen like that.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Can you describe that?
Sure. Yeah, I will, at this point in my career, when I turned in the version of January and July that was contractually due, my editor read it, and who had been the book scout for the Weinsteins years ago. So I've known him for a long time. And the head of the publishing company read it, because we've worked together a long time. And I get some notes back from them. I get notes back from my agent. And my wife usually has something to say. But kind of at that point, what they'll have me do is work with a developmental editor, if that's not my main editor. Most main editors also do developmental editing. And that's when they'll read through it and they'll go, well, they're not picking apart like punctuation or anything at that point. They're like, oh, we thought Lydia was a really great character, but you don't bring her on till page 80. Could she be brought in earlier? Or we kind of thought, sometimes the characters are over analyzing what they're doing and they're kind of getting a little repetitive, or they're saying they're going to take action and then they don't. I mean, you start to find little warts like this in the story, and I want to be edited. When I'm not, most successful authors are not precious about being edited. They understand that being edited is because you've just got your perspective on the book, and they're looking at it from the viewpoint of readers, maybe in a way that you haven't, because you're just trying to get the story down, although I'm always being mindful of my readers. So it is a process a lot of times where they're not saying, cut chapter 7, but they might say, we're trying to get to this action of the story. How would you solve that? And so a lot of times I go, well, that's not right. And then 24 hours later, I'm like, oh, they're totally right about that. It's like you sort of like accept, a lot of the feedback. I mean, there have been times where I have disagreed with something, and that is fine. That is my prerogative. It's my name on the book. And if I tell them this is why I want to do it like this, then they will respect that. But I would say 99% of the time, their feedback makes me think, how could this be improved? And then but a good editor, a good developmental editor will leave that up to you. Like one of the things that the very first draft I had of this, I'm selling this book so hard by telling you all its faults before it's out. But the first draft of it was really primarily from January's point of view. And I went a lot deeper kind of into her life. And then she encountered July and she saw everything we learned about July entirely from her point of view. And I realized they were like, that, we would like to know more about July. And I was like, okay. So I had thought I should do it that way, and then I talked myself into not doing it that way. And then what they basically said to me, your original idea was the correct one. So trust yourself, you know. So that's kind of, you just go through this process and you make those changes. They'll read it again. They'll be a more detailed, and then you'll have more like line editing, which is what people think of like, oh, punctuation, or you use the verb respond 7 times on one page. You'll need to change that, you know, things like that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Ellen Cooper again. I had a question. The first time you finished a manuscript, how was that publishing process for you?
Well, the first manuscript I finished was not published anywhere, thank God. Because it was the dumbest book ever. It was called The Murdered Vampire, and it was about a guy who was a complete jerk and was famous for playing Dracula, and someone staked him. Someone killed him with a knife to the heart. Just like how you would imagine Dracula would die. And it was not a good book, but I finished it and I thought, oh my gosh, I can finish one of these. So the next book I wrote was Do Unto Others, which was my first novel and was about the librarian accused of killing the book burner. And I worked on the other book for a long time, and it was really scary to sort of stop working on it. But I also felt like it was a dead end. So I wrote the first chapter of Do Unto Others, and actually Rice had a continuing studies conference where they brought in a bunch of writers, and they had a manuscript conference. And this was to learn about writing and publishing. And they had like a romance category and a science fiction and mystery. And so I entered the first chapter in the mystery category. You just had one chapter you could enter, and I won. And the 3 judges, who I all got to know much better when I was professionally published. I mean, one of them, did a book tour together later, and another one, we had the same editor. They said, you should send this to New York. And I was like, I only have the 1 chapter. And they're like, then you need to finish it and send it to New York. So I did that whole finishing part, which was really hard. And you're supposed to, try to query agents and get an agent who will then take you to the publisher. I didn't do that. All of my advice is terrible because I don't know that any of it would work now. But they had a mystery bookstore owner did a mystery conference here and got some editors from New York to come down. And I met 2 of them. And I knew, because this book was set in the South, in East Texas, between Austin and Houston, kind of not quite East Texas, but in rural Texas. Those were the 2 editors. One of them was originally from Arkansas, and the other was originally from the very southern part of Missouri. I said, they might like this because they're from the South. So I sidled up to both of them. I met as a volunteer at the conference and managed to talk with them for a minute and just said, but I was like respectful. I wasn't like, people have followed people into bathroom stalls and shoved manuscripts at them. It wasn't like that. I just said, I have a full-length manuscript that would appeal to readers of Margaret Meron and Sharon McCrum, featuring a male librarian. So it could be of interest to libraries for purchase. You try to give them some kind of marketing comp. Yeah. And I said, would you like to see a sample chapter? And they both asked for the whole book. And then 6 weeks later, I got home from work and there was a message on my answering machine. I'd gone to happy hour after work, so it was a little bit later. And it was one of the editors. It was one from Ballantyne's. And he said, I've read your book and I'd really like to talk to you about it. And I was like, oh my God, what does this mean? And an author friend said, they don't call you to reject it. They send you a letter to reject it. And so the longest weekend of my life ensued. And Monday he called me and he said, I am actually on a buying freeze right now because I bought too many books this year, but the freeze should be lifted in about another month. And then 4 days later, the other editor called me and said, I would also like to buy, well, didn't say also because they didn't know, but they said, I would like to buy this book. And I didn't have an agent. Well, let me tell you, if you have offers from St. Martin's and Valentine, it's super easy to get an agent because they don't have to do any work, right? You know, they don't have to go out and put it on submission. So I talked with a friend, I got my first agent, a couple of friends who recommended their agent, got an agent, and it actually ended up going with Valentine, even though the Buying Freaks, because they were, I think, the better placement for me. So my journey was a little weird with my first book, but normally how you would do it is you would approach agents and the agent serves as your sales rep to the publishers to submit the book. They don't want to see submissions. I mean, Valentine at that point was getting 3,000 unsolicited submissions a month.
That's great.
And that's just very hard to get discovered out of that. So.
Okay. Excellent question. And Jeff, that leads to something that I wanted to ask you, and that was kind of education-wise, career-wise, what led you to best-selling author?
Well, I was an English and history double major, surrounded by engineers at Rice. And I think they all worried I was going to starve to death. And now it's like, how do you like me now? Because they're like, oh my God, Jeff, I got your new book. I know you did. I'm sure you did. I mean, I don't know how I got to bed. I was just like trying to be consistent in output. Yeah, except then you hear about me taking these breaks. But be consistent in output, be aware of the market, but not be writing to the market. And just, you know, trying to tell stories in the most compelling way that I could. It's so much of this is out of an author's control. There are only certain things you cannot focus on the publisher deciding to really get behind your book or not, because they may not do that. You may write a very worthy book and they may just treat it like any other release. Or they may decide to get really behind you and put it really hard.
Did you work in advertising? I think you were copywriter.
I did. I was a copywriter and a creative director in advertising for many years. And yeah. Yeah, I really probably should have written about that world at some point. But Dorothy Sayers already did it masterfully in Murder Must Advertise. So, you know.
Great. Okay, we got time for one or two more. Anybody else have any questions?
Jeff, what's a story here in Austin that you know about that nobody else has told you?
I don't know of a story like that. Yeah. There's so many writers in Austin. I was sort of amazed someone wasn't already kind of writing heavily about the Westlake area or the Westlake experience. Because it's like, oh, people aren't really, you know, doing that. So.
Well, we might know one or two stories that need to be told.
Yeah, I think someone who's a good unearther of stories is Sarah Bird, who's kind of the queen of Austin writers. I love Sarah, but she's the kind of person who can find, you know, little historical anecdotes. I will say for a long time, it was about the servant girl annihilator back in the 1860s, who was really maybe the first serial killer in America. And that was something that had not been written about. And then Stephen Saylor did a fictionalized treatment of it called A Twist at the End, with O. Henry acting as the detective trying to track down a serial killer. And then Skip Hollandsworth did the Midnight Assassin, which was the other name for the serial killer. But that was something I think a lot of people, I grew up in Austin and I had heard about it like once and no one had really written about it. And then people got more interested in that kind of book, and those are both really great books too. But that would probably have been my pick before it got some attention as being an unusual story that should have been talked about more and wasn't.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming out. We hope to see you next June 8th, and give it up for Jeff Abbott one more time.
Thank y'all for coming.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Sear. I was a grad from 1990. I